adjustment. I should have worn my tall heels. I wore my little heels. Here we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi. Well, so I might be a little bit too prepared. I'm going to read my essay word for word. I'll try to look up, though, every once in a while. So here we go. My father came to America from Puerto Rico when he was 15. He was the only boy in his family and grew up in a very poor part of Manhattan known as Spanish Harlem. My mother is from New York City as well. She grew up in a poor section of the city where crime was abundant. My father and my grandparents were part of what is known as the Great Migration of the 1950s, where thousands upon thousands of Puerto Ricans moved to New York City. My mother met my dad when she was young, about 18, and my father was 20 years older than her, and one of my grandfather's very good friends. My mother fell in love, but also saw my father as a way to break apart from her parents' close and sometimes suffocating supervision. My dad learned a trade and eventually opened his own business. They married and had 2 children, my sister and me, and moved to the suburbs. This was the dream for any Spanish-speaking family migrating from a small island that promised very little opportunity. Creating a better life for your family. This was my grandparents' dream, my parents' dream, and their dream is our dream. But my father had personal struggles. He was an alcoholic. He was also physically and emotionally abusive towards my mother and other women in his family. I know that my mother attempted to leave my dad multiple times, but she always ended up going back. Financial dependence, emotional dependence, and lack of family support all contributed to the cycle of abuse that lasted for years. Emotional abuse involves the destruction of a victim's self-worth. And it's brought about by persistent insult, humiliation, or criticism. I also didn't cry when I practiced this. Often, a victim may be completely dependent on his or her partner for money, leaving them at the mercy of the perpetrator. Thank you, kind sir. Okay. Being victimized by a situation of domestic violence can create feelings of helplessness and even self-doubt. When it comes to being financially dependent on your partner for money, leaving them can be impossible. But my mother found a way out. She earned her licensed practical nursing degree. I remember her graduation, seeing her in her white nurse's uniform. My sister and I were so proud of her. My mom still has this picture of her graduating class where she's standing in a line at the end of the line, and my dad is right there next to her, the only person not a part of the school, with his arm around my mom's shoulder. And I didn't think of it at the time, but now I recognize the power and control mechanisms at work. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men in our community will be the victims of domestic violence in their lifetime. In many of these cases, children are exposed to family violence, which can leave lasting traumatic effects. There's one night I'll never forget. My sister and I shared a room, and on this night, she let me share her bed. And we were frightened because we heard shouting coming from the hallway. My father was drunk, and he and my mom were fighting, and he hollered for my sister to come out of her room, our room, and she did, and I could hear him yelling at her in a really threatening way. As I laid curled up in my bed, I remember thinking that I hated him and that I had to save my older sister, but I couldn't move. I wanted to jump out of bed and run to my dad and punch him in the face and save my family from his terror. But I was frightened and frozen. As a child, I remember being so disappointed in myself for not saving her. And with time, and I'm a therapist, some therapy, I came to realize that it wasn't my fault. But I have to admit, every once in a while, the guilt still haunts me. Shortly after this, and with her nursing degree, my mom left my dad for the final time to create a better life for her and her daughters. Over the next 10 years, my mom eventually remarried. My sister and I gained a sweet younger brother, and I lived in New Jersey until I finished college at Rutgers. My dad got sober, and after college, I moved back to New York, met my husband, earned my master's degree in social work, and in an effort to work towards the next stage of my licensure, I found a job at a small nonprofit in Brooklyn, training to become a structural family therapist. So finding a job as a family therapist was never my goal. I originally accepted it to earn hours that I needed to gain clinical licensure, and I had no particular interest in family therapy or even working with children. Within the first couple weeks, I realized I was there for a reason. So structural family therapy is different from regular family therapy. It changes the you problem to a we problem, and the model views the family as an ecosystem where all members work to sustain problematic behaviors. In this kind of therapy, everyone shares the responsibility of the problem, and family members must adjust their ways to relating to work through it. Ultimately, we believe that families are resilient, and they just don't know it yet. It became my job to help family members experiment with new ways of relating to each other, to utilize untapped resources, and to see how strengths used in one part of their lives could be transferred to their family life. It helped me to understand my own history and gave me perspective. It not only shed light on my past, but also gave me tools to address some issues I was facing then with my family at the time. This model helped me relate to my family in a different, more meaningful and gratifying way. And the wonderful thing about this therapy is that it teaches us that things can change. That the sign of a healthy family is not the absence of problems, but their ability to work through problems. I moved to Memphis 2 years ago with a wonderful and very energetic man who grew up here. We have a beautiful daughter and a relationship that is completely different from my parents. One thing I've learned on my journey is that healing from the past takes different shapes. There's a theory that suggests that as adults we look for intimate partnerships that help us heal from emotional wounds we received during childhood. And I agree at times with this theory. I've seen it with couples that I've worked with, and it resonates with them when I talk about it. I think some of us may do this with our professions, though, and I know I have. I love challenging children and adults to venture outside of the sometimes prescribed, limiting, and suffocating roles that leaves families in a state of inertia. I really love helping families mobilize their way to success. And my inner child likes saving families. My inner child likes to help parents find their power. My inner child likes to help children stand up for themselves. And when my inner child is helping families get better, she gets to be free from the guilt of not being able to save her own family, even if it's just for 45 minutes to an hour. Thank you.